I was sitting in Costa Rica and thinking, well, I'm 79. I should do something for my 80th birthday. I never thought I would live that long to start with. Maybe I should do something different than having a party and cutting the cake and having some presents. So I started thinking of a trip that I could do that would celebrate my 80th. And then I started watching the series Long Way Around, The Long Way Down, and The Long Way Up. While I was watching that, I said to Gloria, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ride an electric bike from Alaska down to Panama. And that's how the idea came about.
Welcome to the Seek Travel Ride podcast, where we share the stories and experiences of people who have undertaken amazing adventures by bike. Whether it's crossing state borders, mountain ranges, countries or continents, we want to share that spirit of adventuring on two wheels with our listeners. Hello, I'm your host, Bella Malloy, and I'm excited to introduce my guest for today's episode of Seek Travel Ride, Robert Fletcher. Robert has an adventure CV that would rival most. He has circled the planet 4 times, travelled to more than 100 countries, run 5 marathons, and gone on numerous long-distance bicycle adventures. So when Robert decided he needed to do something special to celebrate his 80th birthday, he came up with the idea of another trip, and this one would break records. The Octogenarian Odyssey, as Robert calls it, would see him set the world record for the longest journey made on an e-bike, 14,274 kilometres, from the North Pole in Alaska to Panama City. But Robert didn't stop there. Indeed, he has continued on this trip, one that will see him reach Ushuaia, Argentina, a total distance of 27,500 kilometres. Robert is just 1,000 kilometres away from the end of this trip, and I'm speaking to him today from El Calafate in southern Argentina. I'm really looking forward to speaking with Robert today and listening to him share his experiences, not just from this record-breaking ride, but from a life lived fully immersed in that adventurous spirit. Robert, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Bella. Thank you for having me on your show. Before you start, I would like to thank you for doing these type of podcasts, Seek Travel Ride, because all the time when I'm journeying, I see young people that are traveling the world. They're doing remarkable feats of endurance, whether it's on a bicycle or walking or kayaking or Ironman triathlons. And they're not professional athletes. They're not getting paid millions of dollars for doing something. They're not Olympians. They get no recognition. And I'm so glad that your podcast is seeking these people out and giving them recognition for their wonderful things that they're doing and accomplishing their goals and going on adventures around the world. So thank you, Bella.
Oh, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. It really feels like a gift for me as a host and producer of the show to be able to speak with so many people like yourself, Robert, doing amazing things that I quite rightly think more people in this world should know about. And being able to deliver their adventures to a truly global audience has been an absolute pleasure. It really does fill me with joy. So, Robert, I always start the podcast asking my guests the same first question, and I'm going to do that to you as well. And that is, Robert, do you remember the very first bike you ever rode?
Yes and no. My first memory I have goes back to when I had a little red wagon, and I used to get on it and push with one foot and ride as fast as I can. And I went around a corner and hit a fire hydrant, broke the front wheels off that wagon. And my father didn't appreciate that and scolded me for doing that. My next memory is on my 6th birthday, I got a bicycle. And I must have ridden a bike prior to that because I remember getting on that bike and taking off down the road and coming to a T-corner and forgetting how to put the brakes on. And those bikes, you have to sort of pedal backwards with pressure to stop it. And I cruised across the intersection, over the curb and into a fence and scratched the bike up and a little bit of road rash on me. And once again, my father scolded me for not practicing and learning how to ride the bike. But those are my memories of my first bike and my first couple of crashes.
both of them instilled in your memory because of those crashes too, most likely as well. I'm glad that your father's scolding didn't put you off bike riding because, and I must say, and I hinted at this in my introduction with you, Robert, something that's really impressed me when I looked and researched a bit more about you and your story is you really have lived a life full of adventures and travelling. And I always ask the question of, do you remember that first bike you ever rode? Because I can get an inkling into how people perhaps recall those events and whether that spirit of getting on a bicycle and propelling forward under your own energy is something that stayed with them through life. I don't think I have a podcast long enough that could actually go into everything that you've achieved and everything that you've experienced on your travels. Growing up, when did it become clear to you that travelling was something that you were curious about?
Well, our family always traveled for vacations within Canada or the United States. So we're kind of used to packing up and getting in the car and going to some destination that had remarkable beauty and places where we could fish and explore different parts of the North American continent. But I got to give credit to my wife, who has passed away a number of years ago, because she was really the one that said, let's go to Australia in 1968, and then we can work there and start around the world. I give her the credit for suggesting that. And of course, I said, sure, let's do it. And that's when we took off. And ever since then, that has instilled the love of travel, the love of meeting people, exploring different places in me.
Can I just say, as an Aussie, I love that it was a trip to Australia that set this lifestyle on its trajectory as well. And actually, I have a commonality there because my mother actually arrived in Australia from Greece in 1968. Who knows whether or not your trip crossed paths with her? We can have a romantic vision of that maybe. I think something else that came up when I was researching more about you, Robert, is that you were a teacher. And I feel it's a career that never stops when someone teaches, because whether or not it's your job, it's your 9 to 5, I feel that when people are teachers, there's something in them that yearns to explore, learn stuff themselves, and then obviously teach and tell others about it. And I feel that this is something that your trip has done. And in a way, I wonder whether, a career in teaching has melded beautifully with the travels that you've undertaken and the knowledge that you've then built up traveling to all of these countries.
Well, the teaching aspect when we started off to Australia in 1968 was at that time the Dean of Education in Edmonton, Alberta, said I should go out and learn more about the world before I came and worked on my master's degree. So that's when my wife suggested we go to Australia. And I taught in Australia in 68 and 69. And then, of course, I finished my career in Australia in 1997 as principal in Wollongong. And I often thought that maybe if I did the career again, I might want to do teaching in international schools and explore the world in many countries through teaching career. However, it inspired me, I guess, when we did that first trip to keep learning about the world, especially the people of the world and the various stereotypes. And it was early on that I recognized that a lot of the stereotypes I had about people or were introduced to me by media were not true when I got to that country and I saw the people. And I keep thinking that the more I travel, the more I'm going to broaden my mind and appreciate the differences in the cultures and the countries that I explore.
Oh, absolutely. And also, just by way of that, whether you are aware of it subconsciously or not, when you travel to places and you experience these things, when you come back and your circle of friends hear about this, they experience your perspective as well. And you're very right. There's a few common themes that always come in this show. It doesn't matter which guest I interview. It doesn't matter which country they visited. And it is just the kindness of strangers, the kindness of the people all across the world. And also, sadly, just the way so many countries and people of those countries are portrayed in our Western media is so far removed from their experiences in dealing with those people themselves. And I feel world travellers are best placed to actually educate others about this as well, because it's only through those experiences and hearing those alternate points of view and understanding that that is the way that we all can understand that maybe it's not as scary and dangerous a place as we're led to believe as well.
Oh, that's true. I mean, when I started on the North American section of the Odyssey, people were saying, well, what are you going to do when you get to Mexico and the cartels and the crooked police and all the other things that people in Canada and the United States associate with Latin America or Mexico and Central America? And I said, look, I'm more afraid of the bears in Alaska than I am of the cartel in northern Mexico. And it proved that all the journey that I never had any problems with anything other than traffic.
Yeah, exactly. And traffic is probably the thing that often scares me the most with the type of travel that I do, just that interaction with cars in different countries. And I guess sometimes it's a lack of knowledge from drivers knowing how to drive around people on bikes. Sometimes it's a poor culture. It's a driving culture that doesn't really appreciate that people can ride a bike on the road as well. So you're not wrong to think that. It's funny, often when people have travelled in Alaska or Canada and parts of North America, the topic of bears comes up. And I've been put to this that sometimes I highlight the idea of bears out there as being more dangerous than what they really are. But I always give pause for thought for that. It's interesting that you said you were more scared of bears than the cartels. Did you actually come across bears at all?
I would say in Alaska and the Yukon and maybe northern British Columbia, we might have seen 20 bears, all black bears, no grizzlies. When we saw them, we just paused and stayed back on our bikes and waited for them to disappear into the bushes. And then we carried on. And of course, that night, we never would leave food or anything in our tents. And we made sure that was all secured in the van or in the trailer. Just for safety purposes. But yes, we saw quite a few on this trip.
It almost sounds like dealing with the black bears there on a bike. It's a bit similar to this Australian dealing with snakes on the trails. Whenever you see them, it's generally stop, give them your distance, and they'll go away. I'm not saying that's necessarily how all bears and all snakes will react, but generally that's the protocol. That served me well so far as well.
And I think that will serve you well when you get up into the bear country in northern Canada as well.
While we're talking about this, and I definitely want to get into the details of this trip a little bit more later in the show, but just because we're talking about wildlife, what was your experience with mosquitoes and flies up there? Were you there during horrible season or was it not too bad?
It was horrendous. But I got to go back. In 2015, I did Anchorage to Mexico City. And that time I don't think we saw a black fly or a mosquito or a bear or anything. This time, the mosquitoes were swarming all over us. One of my members of my team was from Denmark. She had red bumps all over her every day, and she probably used 2 or 3 cans of spray during the day. It was terrible for her. The black flies would bother you as well. And also the horse flies, if you stopped, they would come and start to bite you. And they could fly probably at 30 kilometers an hour because we would take off on the bike and they would be right with us until they got tired of chasing us. So, yes, it wasn't a pleasant experience on a lot of days up there.
I wonder what the difference was between that trip in 2015 to this one just recently that meant your experience was so vastly different. Was it a different time of year between those two trips?
No, basically the same time of year, but this year, or last year, there was a lot of forest fires in Alaska. So a lot of smoke and everything was around. I don't know how that reacts to insects. And the year in 2015, we had a very wet Alaska. So I don't know. We'll have to ask somebody that knows a little more about insects. But yeah, it was 2 different experiences, totally polar opposite.
And would have caught you off guard because one of the thoughts I had with this trip, knowing that you did that trip in 2015, the first half of this big long tour that you're on now, you've done before, were they the same routes? Were they different routes?
I tried to pick a different route. Of course, in Alaska and the Yukon, there's basically only one road, so you can't avoid that. But in 2015, we took what I would say is a normal bike packing route down through Alaska, Yukon, through Alberta, then down the east side of the Rockies in the United States and crossing into Mexico and down Baja. This time we crossed over to the Pacific headed over towards Vancouver and then down the Pacific coast to Mexico. And then we headed east again to go down the east side of the Bay of California, Sea of Cortez, down to Mazatlan. And then we followed pretty much the same route into Mexico City or close to Mexico City as we did last time. And then, of course, Central America was all new, except when we got to Nicaragua and Costa Rica, where I live, and I know those bike routes from guiding tours there.
Wow. Actually, a previous guest of the show, Robert, Claire, one of her first cycle tours was in Costa Rica and Nicaragua as well. Now, I know you live in Costa Rica. When she was traveling there, she said that when she was in Costa Rica, everyone was warning her about being in Nicaragua and that it was a bit dangerous and whatnot. And she said she didn't feel that at all there. Again, a counterpoint to what we're told about a country, correct? But what was your experience riding through? Well, actually, a step back from that. What's brought you to living in Costa Rica in the first place?
Just the luck, I guess. I finished that trip in 2015 in Mexico City, and I hadn't booked any return flight back to Canada. And at that time, I hadn't been to any country in Central America. So I left my bike with a relative in Mexico City, and I jumped a plane, and I started off in Panama, and then I went into Costa Rica to see a group of my friends that were starting a cycling trip from there up into Belize. And so that when I was in San Jose in Costa Rica, I happened to be in a restaurant, and a young lady walked in, and I thought, should I talk to her? Should I not talk to her? And then I did, and one thing led to another, and now we've been together for 8 years, and that's why I ended up in Costa Rica. It wasn't planned. It was just going to say fate, I guess.
But something that has stayed constant with you is, regardless of where you live, you keep adventuring still. It's not like I don't see you as someone that could keep your feet planted in one spot forever. I think, at least from what I've garnered from you, Robert, your desire to travel and see places is something that's part of your DNA in some ways.
I don't know, maybe, but now that I'm in Costa Rica, I applied for residency, and I think I have that now when I get home. But up to then, I'm on a tourist visa, and it's like 90 days. So I say to Gloria, my wife, I say, shucks, Gloria, your government needs me to leave the country because I've been here 90 days. I'm going to Spain for a bike ride, or I'm going to go to Ecuador, to the Galapagos or someplace. So it's given me every 90 days, I've looked forward to where's my next trip going to go. Now that Gloria's got used to that, she says from now on, she's coming on every trip with me. In fact, she's right here as part of my team for South America.
Fantastic. It's through osmosis. She now has an adventurous spirit with you as well, which is fantastic.
Yes, she's from Colombia who moved to Costa Rica. So it's her travel prior to us getting together has been limited, but now she's seeing quite a bit of the world.
Absolutely fantastic. So, Robert, like we said, we will get into the bones of your trip, but I think it would do a disservice to a podcast about you without talking about some of your previous travel as well. Your first trip, your first bicycle tour was in 1972. I think you went through the UK, is that correct? And did you go through parts of France there as well?
We did. My wife and I took the summer of 72 and we flew to London, and we bought 2 road bikes in London and set them up for bike packing. And we cycled through southern UK and then crossed over and spent most of the time in France, going down the North Sea side and then coming back up the Loire Valley. That was really our very first biking experience of any long distance other than just riding a bike around the city kind of trip. One interesting thing in that trip is 10 speeds had just got invented, and women in France were not bike packing. They ride the more upright bike with the basket in the front and their hat on their head and a few loaves of bread sticking out of the carrier. And when my wife would ride by and all the men would be having their coffee or beer in the outdoor cafes, and they would see a woman with a helmet on. And I don't think we had spandex in those days, but whatever we wore, she always got a great round of applause for her effort, and she quite enjoyed the attention that she was getting in France as maybe one of the first ladies bikepacking through the country, certainly on a 10-speed.
A pioneer at the time. It's interesting, actually, because there's such a big cycling culture in France. Obviously, I live in the Pyrenees, so I'm in the heart of some huge cycling culture there. With the Tour de France visits the region pretty much every year. There's so many Tour de France climbs within a 30, 40 kilometre radius of my house. But it's something that struck me is, and it's not to say there aren't many French women who cycle for sport. I mean, there are. But more often than not, if I see women on a road bike or a touring bike or something in France, they're generally expats or visitors. French women are still, they cycle a lot, but they cycle commute. Cycle is a way to get from A to B. It's not something they necessarily do for exercise. So even in 50 years' time, I'm not saying it hasn't changed at all, but that's something that as an outsider looking in, that's my perception of women cycling in France as well.
That's interesting. I never noticed that. I need to pay more attention next time we go to France, yeah.
Don't get me wrong, there are certainly lots of amazing French women who cycle long distances and do enjoy the sport of cycling and bicycle touring and adventuring on a bike as well. But yeah, just something that I've sort of reflected on is you're more likely to see men on road bikes than women, unfortunately. That first trip in 1972, if we think of the way you travelled then to the way you travel now, there's so many changes have taken place over, I guess, a span of just over 50 years. And navigating back then, was it as simple as picking a town on a map and saying we're going to ride to there and following the road signs, or?
Yeah, you got it. It was that simple. Just look at the map, see where the highway is, and follow the highway and follow the road signs that pointed towards the town that you wanted to get to. And no GPX files to follow, no guidebooks that were available that I can remember.
Because no internet either.
No, not at all. It was a case of meeting other cyclists, usually men, club that were out for an evening ride or a late afternoon ride, and you would ask them where the campground was, and one of them would say, "Oh, I'll take you, follow me," and I would follow them on the bike, and they would take us to the campground where we were staying. It was just get on the morning, start pedaling in the direction you want to go, and the freedom that gave you was pretty good, actually, because you didn't have to be really anywhere at any time.
There's a part of me that thinks because it was so much more simpler back then, also just the world has become a smaller place in a way now because we have access to technology. We have a plethora of guidebooks. We have the internet. We have YouTube. We can see people's adventures on social media and photos. So we learn about places we perhaps otherwise would never have known that it existed. I certainly grew up. We had two things in our household whenever we did like school assignments. One was like World Book encyclopedias, and the other one was like the Britannica yearbooks and an atlas as well. And if I wanted to learn about the world, generally I had to flick through those and see if there was anything at all that I could learn. But you're certainly not learning. You might learn about countries, but you're not really learning about areas within countries.
I would add National Geographic magazines to that list.
Oh, of course. My father collected National Geo magazines, and I used to love flicking through them. I often wonder if my love for photography actually stemmed from spending hours turning pages of Nat Geo magazines and stuff as well. And you're right, that was another area where we could get tidbits of information about something so far away and mysterious. And I wonder, I'm not saying you yearn for that because we adjust to technology as it comes our way and we appreciate it for many reasons as well, but do you ever yearn to tour in that fashion where you're oblivious as to what the next day is going to bring, you're not sure what the next town you're going to reach is even called, or how many people live there, or what it's like, that you're learning every day? I'm not saying you don't learn now, but to me it just seems so starkly different now.
What I do feel that I'm missing is when I look at the younger people, the bike packers now that are in their late 20s or early 30s, or maybe even we met one yesterday from Australia who's 60 and is cycling from Alaska down to Argentina as well, is the freedom they have because they don't have a set schedule and everything. They take off and they go down the back roads, the dirt roads, the gravel roads. And I kind of long for their freedom to say, this is a great place. I'm going to stay on this beach for a few more days and things like that. Where my planning is, I can tell you where I'm going to be day by day pretty well before I even start. And right now, we left Cartagena on July the 4th, and we're on schedule to reach the end of our trip on December 11th. So when I tell these bikepackers what I'm doing, they can't believe that I have planned it and organized that way, and I can't believe the freedom that they have that I'm not experienced because I have set my goals to be in a certain destination every day, partly because I have people joining me and I need to have them on the airports to fly home or to meet them and things like that. So I yearn for the freedom of the bikepackers and the fact that they are exploring a different world than I'm exploring.
Do you think maybe, Robert, and look, if you decided to put your feet up after a trip that's 27,500 kilometres, I wouldn't hold anything against you for that. But do you think because of that, maybe your next trip is going to be a bit less regimented? If you're planning another adventure soon, it's going to be one that maybe leaves you a bit more freer that way?
I don't think so. And we're now talking about Octo Odyssey 3.0, which I'm planning now. I'm in the midst of planning that. I get a kick out of the planning as well. I don't know whether it's the fact that I was administrator in the school system for years and planning was part of my career, but I like the planning and figuring out the itinerary. And it's also part of when I toured with touring companies. You had the itinerary and it was, we're leaving here, point A, and you guys have to get to point B tonight, So it's part of my touring history, the detail of planning. But right now I'm setting out the plan the same way for the east coast of South America and then over to Europe next summer.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, I'm putting it out here now, Robert. If you happen to travel through the French Pyrenees, you need to get in touch. I'd love to share some pedal strokes with you on the road.
Well, I will get in touch because you mentioned earlier the famous climbs and everything. And that's part of the theme of my European one is to hit some of the famous climbs in Spain and France and Italy as well, just to experience the climbs.
Well, Robert, if our schedules allow, I'll let you know that I live probably closest to the most famous French climb there is, the Tourmalet.
Oh, see, yes.
Yeah, I'm 50 kilometres from the summit of the Tourmalet. Doesn't matter which approach you take, that's where I am. And I, hand on heart, if my schedule can allow, I would love to ride the Tourmalet with you. That would be fantastic.
Okay, we have a date. We just got to pick a date. We have a meeting. We just have to pick the date.
Absolutely, done. And yeah, I'll shout you whether it's a beer or a wine you want or or something at the boulangerie. It's on me.
Okay. Well, I learned in Australia, shout for shout.
Yeah, there we go. Fantastic. Let's get into this trip then. Octo Odyssey. There's a few questions that come to mind. The first one is, okay, you've lived a life of travel and adventure and you've obviously been active all your life. But what sparks the idea to take off on something this big for your 80th birthday?
Well, nothing really grandeur about it. I was sitting in Costa Rica and thinking, well, I'm 79. I should do something for my 80th birthday. I never thought I would live that long to start with. Maybe I should do something different than having a party and cutting the cake and having some presents. So I started thinking of a trip that I could do that would celebrate my 80th. And I thought of going to West Africa. I haven't been to West Africa, a lot of countries there. My wife, Gloria, said, no, you're not going there without me. And then I thought about the Amazon and I rejected that because my Peruvian friend told me that if I did that, I'd probably be eating snakes and monkey brains and some of the other types of animals that are in the jungles. So I dumped that idea quickly. And then I started watching the series Long Way Around, The Long Way Down, and The Long Way Up. And it was the third series of Ewan McGregor and Charlie Borman, who rode an electric Harley-Davidson motorcycle from Ushuaia to Los Angeles, California. And while I was watching that, I said to Gloria, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ride an electric bike from Alaska down to Panama. And that's how the idea came about.
Wow. And that sparks the idea, but there's lots of things that have to happen in the lead up to make this work. Like a question, and this is from my beautiful mother and father-in-law, who are at the same sort of age group, let's just say. The question that they had is, like, when they think of people taking trips like this, it's normally a younger person that would be the person on the bicycle taking it. And they wanted to know specifically, what did you have to do in your preparation? Was there extra preparation that you needed to do to build yourself up to being able to take a trip of this kind?
As far as the physical aspect, no, because I have ridden like 5 days a week for many, many years. And I've made long trips over the years. So the physical aspect, I didn't do anything different. I knew I was in shape and could do it. But what was different was the extent of the planning that I had to do, the extent of how do I purchase a car in Canada when I'm in Costa Rica, a tent trailer, how do I put a team together, how do I pay for it, what about a foreign language in Mexico and Central America. It was all the other details outside of it, the physical aspect that took a lot of work. How do I get sponsors? All that kind of thing took quite a few months to put all that together.
Yeah, okay. And so then would you say that because you've lived a life of physical adventures, it's not like you retired and then you slowed down or anything. You've kept active your whole life. So physically, that wasn't a barrier for you to even consider. Like did you even pause to consider the physical toll it would take to do this?
Not really. I remember some people asked me, well, do you think you can do it? And I said, yeah, of course. That's not even a question. I will do it. But I got to say to you and your listeners, I haven't led a perfect life. I've followed a career and a family, and that led to having naps on the sofa. It led me to get overweight and go through periods of time where I wasn't exercising. So I haven't been perfect exercising all my life. I've had some times where I've let it go and I paid the penalty for that, and then I had to get back and exercise and lose weight again. So it hasn't been a physical life. It's totally 100%.
I wonder if that makes you appreciate being physically fit a bit more than having the experience of not being in, let's say, peak condition. Because I guess the other perspective of it is, I've seen this in people before where all of a sudden they've hit an age and they've given into a sort of societal norm type of mindset that people of my age can't do things. And I'm old now. And then because they perceive themselves as being older, they act older, and then all of a sudden they become older. And I've often wondered, what is it in some people that rejects that sort of view, and what is it in others that brings it on? To me, it doesn't seem, Robert, that you've ever considered age to be a barrier for you.
No, and I would like, that message to get out, that age is not a barrier to people, that you can still get out and do it. You don't have to ride the length of North and South America. You can get out and enjoy walking or kayaking or whatever your activity is. But age is no barrier, even if it's just traveling. I know that people have told me, in fact, our guide that we had on our tour from Alaska to Mexico City, young lady from South Africa, she referred to me as a teenager, but a little more mature. I took that as a compliment.
Oh yeah, it's definitely a compliment. It's definitely a compliment. If you could, and I guess testament to you, Robert, you probably are a bit that way. You are a teenager with much more maturity, with much more experience, taking on things that a lot of teenagers probably wouldn't take on. Obviously, something else that you're doing this trip on an e-bike. When did you transition to riding an e-bike?
It wasn't really a planned one. I had always been, I'm going to ride my road bike, my mountain bike until I can't ride anymore. But living in Costa Rica, I started doing tours for people. I called myself Tailwind Tours. And during one of those tours, a couple of people have said, I have bad knees. Do you have an electric bike? And another one said, I'm coming with my husband, but I can't keep up. I want an electric bike. So I went and purchased 2 inexpensive electric bikes in Costa Rica for these people that were coming on the tours. And the first month I tried them out, I enjoyed them, but I went back to my road bike and my mountain bike and just left them for the people coming on tours. Then one day I was out on a ride and I went over, a car was in front of me and children were running all around. So I thought I got to, move over to the oncoming lane and avoid a child running out in front of me. But I was watching the children, and when I moved over to the other lane, a speed bump painted in yellow paint was there, and my slick tires on my road bike didn't hold as I crossed it at a bad angle, and the bike slipped out from underneath me, and I, of course, knocked myself out, fractured my hip, and broke 3 ribs. That was bad enough, but that meant that I had to cancel a trip in Patagonia for a ride I was going on, and it meant that I couldn't do golfing, which I also enjoyed doing, until it healed. And as it was healing, I had planned another trip from Frankfurt in Germany out to Czech Republic and back. So I thought, gee, I'm not in shape to ride that trip solo. I'm going to rent an electric bike. And so I rented an electric bike in Frankfurt. I rode it for 1,100 kilometers, totally enjoyed it. And ever since then, I've been an e-bike fan. And when I got home, I bought a quality German e-bike in Costa Rica that I enjoyed riding for the remaining years. And now with this trip, Velo Bicycles out of Seattle have given me a couple of e-bikes for myself and the team. And they're great e-bikes, and I enjoy riding them. And that's my story of how I got the e-bikes.
I love hearing that because it speaks to me a lot, because it's often how I've perceived how I'll transition. I love riding my bike. It doesn't matter whether I'm riding to the shops, whether I'm riding on a tour, whether I'm riding up the Tourmalet. I just love riding my bike. And I've often thought that it will be something, how long can I do this? And I still distinctly remember when I first came across e-bikes. I must admit, Robert, and I've said this before on the show, I was riding up the Gavia Pass in Italy, which is a very, very hard mountain pass. It's near the Stelvio. I'd done the Stelvio the previous day, and I was on a particularly steep section of that pass. And then I could hear this old man in Italian behind me starting to swear in Italian. And I thought, what's going on? And all of a sudden, bzzz, there was a woman on an e-bike that just flew past, no sweat. She was having a great day. She could stop, she could take photos, she could take her jacket off, she could put her jacket on. We were suffering. And I remember my perspective, and he was shouting at her, saying, how dare you, sort of thing. And I remember thinking, oh, that's not fair. That was my mindset. And this was 2016, and I'm ashamed to say, but that was my original mindset of e-bikes at the time was, what? And then it was a couple of days later, recounting that story in the hotel that we were staying at in Bormio, Hotel Fenivia, a fantastic place for cyclists if you want to check that one out. But I was speaking to Daniele, who runs the hotel, and he was saying e-bikes are fantastic. They just allow people to keep cycling. They're wonderful and they are the future. And I have since learnt of people who can stay cycling in their cycling club because they have an e-bike now, who can recover from an injury because they have an e-bike now, who weren't a cyclist before but with an e-bike can join their partner on a trip. And I just see all these possibilities. I have so many friends now on an e-bike, and I absolutely love the potential of what they bring. In fact, one of my beautiful friends recently said she thinks the E in e-bike, it doesn't stand for electric, it stands for enabler, because it enables her to do so many adventures. And I love that, and it's 100% what it's done for you here as well.
Exactly, and I agree with you. I wrote an article on my website about is e-bike cheating, because one day I was going up a steep climb in Costa Rica, and I passed 2 young people on top quality road bikes, and I apologized. I said, I'm cheating. I got an electric motor. And then I got home and I thought about it, and I said, well, cheating applies that there's some rules that you're participating in a sport or a game and there's rules and you've broken some rules. And I thought, I didn't break any rules. I was just out for a ride. And then I thought, when did I first start to cheat? Was it when I got rid of my 1-speed bike and went to 3 speeds? Was it when I went to 10 speeds? Was it when I went to 3 up front and 11 at the back and had a 33 speed? Was it when I went from my back cluster of 25 to 28 to 32 to 34 and now 48? What point in time do you start cheating? And to me, none of it's cheating. We're just looking how to keep riding, to ride further and maybe make the climb a little bit easier. And well, one time we did Amsterdam to Rome ride, and I'm on my road bike, a nice Trek Madone, and same thing. I'm riding up a hill and I hear something. It's a lady on an e-bike coming by me and the sweat is pouring off me. And I think, wow, no effort for her. And then a few days later in Switzerland, I see a lady on an e-bike, and drafting in behind on his road bike was her husband. And he was using her for pacing him and breaking the wind as I was struggling into this headwind. So I got thinking, well, maybe there's something about these e-bikes that I need to try.
Yeah, I'm so glad you did, because look at what you've done now. Can I ask, because obviously there's an extra complexity when you tour with an e-bike, which is an obvious one, is battery range. And so how do you manage your trip? You were talking about you've got a pretty defined schedule planned out there. You know where you're going to be from day to day. So you obviously know how far you're going, but from a battery range point of view, how are you managing that on this trip?
Just before I get to this trip, when I've done the rides in Europe on e-bikes, and I've done 3 of them there with rental e-bikes, the batteries can get you 100 to 140 kilometers, with a top quality battery on a decent bike. And only a few times touring through Europe have I ever plugged in at lunchtime just to get an extra bit of distance out of it. So it was never a problem, on a continent like Europe where there's towns everywhere and you can charge everywhere. And I just charged at night. But on this trip, I was facing Alaska, Yukon, northern British Columbia, where we'd be wild camping. And we had no way of plugging into a hotel room socket or anything like that. So I did install an inverter in the car to charge while the car is running. And Evelo Bicycles also gave us a number of batteries. So I had 3 batteries for each bike, I think it was. So if the other bike wasn't being used, I had at least 3 batteries extra. But when I depleted one battery, I would hand it off to the team. They would plug it in the car and start charging, and they would hand me another battery. And we're still doing that on this South American Odyssey as well. So that's how I got around long-distance riding. But my Facebook friend, Gustav Sabernini from Slovenia, he rode an e-bike from Anchorage, Alaska to Ushuaia, Argentina, and he carried 3 batteries on his bike. And a few days he ran out of juice and he had to push his bike or try and pedal it without a battery. So there are many ways of doing it, especially when, in my case, put together a team and I had the support vehicle for charging. But I've ridden around Alberta during COVID. I did 3 tours there and 1 in British Columbia, both for 2 weeks and all of them for 1,000 kilometers on my little electric folding bike. And I only had 2 batteries, but I planned my destinations to fit how long the batteries would last.
I remember actually on a recent tour that my husband and I took across the Pyrenees, there was a campground in a beautiful place called Tarascon-sur-Ariège. And there was a French couple that were doing the same route in the other direction that I got talking to. And one of them was on an e-bike and they had it plugged in at the campground at the electric charge points. Again, in some areas, and as you mentioned in Europe, it's going to be a lot easier to get stuff charged than, say, somewhere in the middle of the Rockies or in Patagonia, perhaps. But also when we talk about battery ranges, they're just getting better and better each day as well. What sort of daily distances are you doing?
Well, I can, for North America, I averaged 116 kilometers per day The longest day was 165. The shortest was 39 kilometers. For South America, we're a little bit under that. I think we're averaging about 110 right now. The longest day is still about the same, 160. And I think our shortest day was 79 or something so far. That's a full day riding for me.
Yeah, that's still decent distances as well, regardless of a motor or not. Consistently, especially when you amass how many kilometres you've done. There's something you spoke about there, Robert, was the support team, and I mentioned it in my introduction. That first section of your trip, the first 14,274.4 kilometres, that was part of a world record. To set a Guinness World Record, I know from interviewing previous record holders that there's certain requirements that need to be documented along the way. And I imagine that formed part of the planning for this trip as well.
Well, the Guinness World Record was not part of the original plan. I'm going to say 4 or 5 months into the planning, I'm out riding my bike, and I get lots of ideas riding my bike. Part of my problem is I get home and I can't remember what all my good ideas were.
Happens to the best of us.
But that particular day I was out riding, I thought, I wonder who the oldest guy is that ever done anything on a bike, an electric bike or something. So I did remember that, and I went home and researched it and found the category in Guinness's World Record. And I thought, I'll apply. That won't hurt. So I applied, and 12 weeks later, I got back saying, yes, we've accepted your application, and here are all your things that you're required to do, like you must ride the same bike the whole distance, you can't draft, you must never be within 6 feet, 2 meters of anybody or a vehicle, you must have witness statements every day, you must have witnesses to start and end, you must supply video, on it went, and oh, wow, this is going to be tough. But of course, we started off and we got our witnesses, a group of riders from North Pole, Alaska, from the bike club, came out to ride with us the first day, and we got some of them to witness it. And a few days later, we found out we got them to sign the wrong form. And we thought, oh, wow, that's a good start. But lucky us, the mother of one of those people became a friend on Facebook and said, I'm friends of the people that signed your form. I wrote back and said, I'm going to send you 2 forms. Can you get them to redo it for me, please?
Lucky.
And they did, so we got that part.
Power of social media.
The same thing happened at the end. We're so busy drinking margaritas and beer, we forgot to get the witnesses to sign the fact that we rode into Panama City. And I had to spend about 6 weeks tracking down the waitress from the restaurant and the police officer that were there, get them to sign the form and send them back to me.
That would have been a very costly margarita. Could you imagine the cost of that margarita? It cost you a world record.
Exactly on that. But we sent in all kinds of photographs of people, and we had our logbook that we documented every day about what time we started, what time we finished, how much rest time we had, how high we climbed, how far we went, what hotel we stayed at. So they had all the documents they needed, and they did approve the record.
And what an achievement to have next to your name there as well. And I imagine, like other world record holders I've interviewed, there's a sense that something that they've always established was it's their name that goes with the record, but there's a support crew that helped enabled it as well. And it was something that they always said was a bit sad, was that their support crew doesn't get acknowledged in that way. I imagine you're probably a bit the same there as well.
Right. I had a good-sized crew. There was Kim from Denmark that rode the northern section to Vancouver, Yoda from Greece that did the whole trip, Wayne from Canada that did the whole trip, Kyle that did from United States, did United States and Mexico, Central America, and Joanna from Colombia did the Mexico and Central America trip. So it was a diverse group. They all had special skills. I didn't necessarily start out thinking that that was what we were going to form. I did put an application out on the Facebook on the Pan American Travelers Facebook group, thinking maybe somebody would like to undertake driving the vehicle for us. I got 29 applications from all kinds of wonderful people.
Wow.
And out of that, I selected the crew I did. They all had one thing in common, even though 4 of them were quite young, in the early 30s, late 30s. They all had traveled extensively around the world. It all had skills with cameras or drones or cooking or management. We formed a very good team that got me to the finish line. And I appreciate the fact that we could form a team from so many different countries, young and old, male and female, and we got the job done.
Yeah, and you've created memories with that team together, so it's a bond between your support crew and yourself that'll never be broken for sure. It is such a monumental trip, Robert. I always catch myself in my podcast because I like asking questions that go a bit deeper. I don't like the superficial questions that everyone's going to ask you. What was the best place? What was the worst place? Those sort of things. Because I feel a trip like this has so many of those moments. To decant it to just one is so hard. But I'm going to go in contrast today and just ask you, reflecting back on the first leg of that trip, North Pole to Panama City, so much happens in between there. But what was a moment that you look back on now, and maybe it's a whole section, not just a moment, but that you look back on now and you just think, wow, did that happen? Like something that perhaps was quite unexpected that you didn't think of at the time, that you never conceived that occurred during this trip.
Well, I think there's a few of them.
There'd have to be.
Mexico comes to mind first. One, meeting the police there, because everybody talks about how they have to bribe the police and that kind of thing in Mexico. We were treated so well by the police. We were given escorts on major highways to keep the cars away from us. We were given escorts through the desert where the hurricane had brought sand and drifted across the road, so they thought it was dangerous for us to ride without an escort down through the Sonora Desert. We were invited out for lunch and treated to lunch by the whole squad in a Mexican town. We got set up our camp on the grounds of a police station near the Guatemala border. And when the commander found out that I was an 80-year-old Guinness's World Record kind of guy, he gave me his bed and his office and his shower for the night, and I slept in the police station. So that whole concept of the police was entirely different for me than what people are led to believe about the police and corruption. The beautiful cities of Mexico and the magic towns and the Day of the Dead celebration in Oaxaca stands out as so great a memory. The people were so friendly. They would stop their cars and give me money, and they probably didn't have all that money. They would give me food. They would give me water. They would give me beer, tequila. One guy even pulled up and offered a big bag of marijuana.
Would have been a very chill day.
It would. Kyle did accept a small little packet of it, which proved to be a mistake later on when we stopped and the police did a search of the car and the dog sniffed out his marijuana.
Oh, my goodness.
Cost us $75 in a fine. But it was incredible about the things that people do for you, and it continues all the way down. And same in Argentina, people honk at me all day long, mainly because I got a sign on the back of my bike that says Alaska to Argentina. So people see that, and I guess they appreciate the effort and what I'm doing.
You deserve all those appreciative cheers of support, though, because something else that struck me, Robert, is when you're cycling on those routes, you're probably cycling areas where it's not probably uncommon to see another bike traveller, another cyclist, especially, sections you were talking about, the Pacific coast there. I've heard that it can be a popular spot for people that are travelling on a bike, and certainly sections down through some of these well-trodden routes. But I do wonder how often you've come across someone that's perhaps your age, if at all.
Nobody my age. Yesterday, just coming in here, I met a couple from Amsterdam, Netherlands, and they were going north, but they're not to Alaska. They were spending 1 year just in South America, exploring it by bike. We stopped, we chatted. We always have the same questions. Where are you from? Where are you going? How long you been on the road? What made you do it? can we exchange emails or Instagram or something? Can we get a photo? So we have this little get together. And then I didn't see him, but my team spotted another biker behind me. So they waited for him, and he was from Australia. He was 60 years old.
G'day, mate.
Yeah, good day, mate. And he had started in Alaska and was going all the way to the bottom as well. So my team and the people from the Netherlands and the Aussie had a little celebration and high fives and photographs on the side of the road yesterday. I would say people in the 60s met 2 or 3. Most are late 20s and 30s that I see. There might be some that are in 50s, but they're doing shorter trips, like a month-long trip or a 2-week tour, that kind of thing. Gustav Sabarini, he did the trip and he finished it at the age of 71, and he started in Anchorage. So I believe I'm the oldest person to ride any kind of bike from Alaska to Ushuaia, Argentina. But my research hasn't been extensive other than trying to Google it.
It's interesting because, and I hope that there will be people that will listen to this and be of your age group who actually maybe shift their perspective on what they can still do as well. That would be just beautiful, so that it's not just a handful of people that you've seen maybe 60 or 70 years old.
Well, I might mention that there is a Facebook group that I belong to. It's called the Royal Society of Octogenarian Cyclists. And I think there's something like 12 or 1,300 of us that belong to that Facebook group. So there are a group of people in the world that are 80 and over and still active in cycling in some kind of fashion.
We have, I don't want you to take offense of this, but there's definitely a saying, and I often think about it when I'm cycling where I live in France, and it is, beware the old man on a bike. And the reason you say that is you should never discount someone's ability because of their age, because that person has probably been riding their bike for decades,
yes.
And they could probably still wallop you up a climb. I don't know if you've heard that saying before as well.
No, I've heard variations of it for sure, right? But not me. I've never been the fastest rider. I've never been the best climber. I just seem to be able to sit on a bike seat for 8 or 10 hours a day.
And for how many days? Like how long ago was it that you first set off?
For the North American section or this section? Or
yeah, for the North American section.
I started North America. I left Edmonton, Alberta, Canada on July 1st, Canada Day's birthday. And I started pedaling in Alaska on July 4th, United States birthday, Independence Day, 2022. I got to Panama City, I think it's 5 months and 5 days later. And then I took a break of 5 months so I could wait for the seasons to change south of the equator, so I wouldn't be in the Andes in the middle of winter. And I went back to Costa Rica, and then on June 4th, I left Costa Rica and took the car, bikes, and Joanna with me to Panama City to get everything ready to ship the car to South America, to Cartagena in Colombia. And I started pedaling on July 4th, exactly 1 year after the date that I set out in North Pole, Alaska. And I've been on the road ever since.
Wow. You obviously developed routines being on the road for that long. Have there been, I appreciate you did take a 5-month break for weather reasons, and totally understandable. I watched a documentary recently of someone who was cycling not just in the winter in the Andes, but through the wet season, and that just looks absolutely grim. I think it was the wet season. I think he was in Ecuador where I was looking, and it just looked it was just mudfest central. Sheets of water raining on him each day. I couldn't imagine what it'd be like camping like that. But when you're on a trip that goes on and on and on each day, are you as excited each day for that trip, or do you also naturally have some low moments as well?
Oh, I have low moments as well, for sure. Well, since November the 11th, I've been going through, I'm going to say bad weather, through Chile, through the Patagonia there, the famous Astral Route number 7, maybe one of the most beautiful roads in the world. Cloudy, rain all the time. I didn't see hardly any of the mountaintops or the glaciers. So it was cold, -2 in one case. So I had to ride through the rain and the cold there. Then we crossed back into Argentina and we got sunshine again. I thought that was great. And then I got the wind. So every day I look at the wind. Am I going to be riding in a tailwind or a headwind? And unfortunately, most of the time it's been some headwinds. And there was 2 days where the gale force or the speed of the wind was 80 kilometers per hour, which is well into the gale force categories. And I deemed it too dangerous to ride at that time. And in both cases, I put the bike in the car and we drove approximately 15K to the next town where we stayed rather than ride with that wind blowing me across the road. So, yeah.
I have actually experienced gusts of that severity. And I remember I was in an event, the Ultimate Snowy Challenge it was called. It's the only time where I've had to walk my bicycle down a hill because of the winds. There's no standing up still. It's not about strength to keep your momentum forward. It's dangerous, especially if it all of a sudden comes from the side as well.
Right. The other thing is the noise of the wind. You can't hear traffic coming behind you either. So I don't know what is coming and things. Yes, I had to, when the first time we did that, it was on a downhill and there was no way that I could ride downhill. I had to get off the bike. And I started walking and I thought, this is silly because even to get back on the bike, it's difficult to get your balance with the wind buffeting you and blowing you. So in those 2 occasions, it was, I think, well, in fact, in one occasion, the wind caught the front door and blew it off its hinges and damaged the front fender. So we had to spend 1 extra day to repair the car in the next town in Argentina from the wind damage.
You know it's pretty windy when a car gets damaged from the wind.
Yeah.
Yeah, far out. Robert, what about days there? You mentioned when the wind's too strong, you just called it's too dangerous, get in the car, drive a short distance to the next town. What about days where it's wet and where you don't call it? Like, what keeps you motivated to keep cycling in those type of adverse conditions?
Well, I play a little mental game like, okay, let's see if I can get 10 more Ks. Okay, I get 10 more. Oh, well, let's try for another 10. And I chop it up into little sections. And I keep going that way. And I keep hoping that the next curve will bring blue sky and sunshine and no rain, but it doesn't seem to happen. But that's the kind of game that I keep playing with myself, a mental game to, okay, you can do 10 more, and then 10 more and 10 more, and pretty soon you've done 110 or something like that. And you're at your destination. And you're in a warm shower, hot shower.
Oh, that nothing beats the feeling of that hot shower at the end of a day riding in grim weather, though, does it?
No, it's one of the great things that I look forward to.
Can I ask, was it always the plan to head to Ushuaia? Like Panama City was where the world record was to finish. Was it always the plan to continue to the tip, fin del mundo, the end of the world?
The seed, Bella, was planted early on. Early on, I had a production company out of Vancouver interested in doing some type of series for television, Netflix type of thing, something like that, documentary. And in my talking with them, I said, look, fellows, there's also the second season. And they said, what? I said, well, we got to do South America. So the seed was planted very early. And I also mentioned to Gloria after she sort of gave me approval to do North America without her. I jokingly said to her, well, you know what comes next? And she said, no. I said, well, South America is sitting there. So those seeds were planted early. And I can remember on the North American section, on the long days, sort of semi-planning South America. It was a surprise to many, but it wasn't surprise to Gloria and I that we decided to do South America.
Oh, wow. Just even spending time with you now, Robert, it's not a surprise to me that that's a decision that you've taken as well. It just seems natural. And, I mean, you've even talked about Octo Odyssey 3.0. There's obviously the next set of this trip too. I love it. It's fantastic.
Well, it seems to have morphed from a birthday celebration into a social experiment, I guess, of documenting by Facebook or Instagram or the books that I'm writing the decade of the 80s. Can I document what an octogenarian does through 10 years of living in his 80s? And it may have a sad ending. Who knows?
Right now, it's an adventurous one, and I think just run with it. I think it's absolutely fantastic. What are your perceptions of aging?
Oh, it happens. It will happen. I think if I keep planning, learning, stay fit, I can probably make it last to the end of the decade. Some days I have no upper body strength anymore because from the waist down is where my strength is. I can tell that the body is aging somewhat as well. I don't know, just keep going, I guess, and try and motivate others to, especially what I've found is so many young people have stopped me and wanted their photographs taken and have mentioned how their parents or their grandparents are doing nothing other than sitting on the rocker on the front porch kind of thing. And I've had some younger people who have ridden with me for a short while, like 5 kilometers, who want to know about riding long distances. So it would be great if I could motivate a few young people to take up long distance cycling or cycling touring. And of course, motivate the older people as well.
It's a joy to hear you have that perception, though, and to know that you're planning out a decade of being active.
Oh, and Octo Odyssey 4.0 may be circling Australia. I've done most of it by vehicle. I haven't done Broome and up in the Northern Territories kind of thing, but I got a feeling that I might want to cycle around Australia's Octo Odyssey 4.0.
Wow. I love it. I'm going to put the seed of Octo Odyssey 5.0 and you're going to go through Central Asia, go across the Pamir Highway and across into China or something like that as well. It was just big trips are in your future. Why not keep adding them on? Why not? I just love the enthusiasm that you've gripped this whole type of adventurous life with. I guess what advice would you give to someone then, Robert, who's maybe listening to you now and thinking of giving something like this a go?
Well, my first thing is, what would it be? I'm thinking of Nike. Just do it, quote. Nike's famous saying, if you can dream it, you can do it. Take one day at a time on the road. There's going to be problems, but the problems can be solved. There's a solution to every problem that Kim used to tell me up in Alaska and Yukon. Why not? It's a big world, and there's lots to see out here, and the landscapes, and the people, and the food, and the music, and the languages, and religions. Wow, it's outstanding. Why do you want to stay home?
I love it. Just do it. Why not? Because you can. It's great. I love it, Robert. I really do. So if people want to find out more, Robert, about this trip of yours and follow along your adventures, whether it's Octo Odyssey original or 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, 5.0, all the way to 9.0, how can they do that? How can they follow along?
Well, on Facebook, I try and post each day experience, and people seem to like what I'm posting there. So to find me on Facebook, you would have to do a search for Robert Fletcher and then / Edmonton or something, because there's lots of Robert Fletchers. Or you can do facebook.com/B and B travel. That's BANDB travel. On Instagram, it's under Octo Odyssey. And my website is octoodyssey.com. And if anybody is interested, you can also order a book on octoodyssey.com called Octogenarian Odyssey, Trading the Sofa for a Bicycle Seat. You can get it on my website, octogenarianodyssey.com, or Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple eBooks, or Kindle eBooks. That's they can follow me in those ways, Bella.
Fantastic. And listeners will link to all of that in the show notes as well. Robert, I think I'm going to have to get my book signed for you on the summit of the Tourmalet.
Oh, for sure.
That would be fantastic. Okay. I have just a few quick questions to end the show with, Robert. And I ask these of all my guests. The first one, I actually think personally it could be one of the hardest questions. And that is, if you were to pick a song that had to be a soundtrack to Octo Odyssey, so a soundtrack to your bike adventure, what song would you pick?
That's a difficult one because I'm not a music person. Music is, I don't mind it. It's just not part of my life. I don't have the radio on. I don't play music when I ride, that kind of thing. I'm not sure I can answer that. What's the one about just 500 miles to go or something?
Is this I Could Walk 500 Miles?
Yeah, that comes to mind.
All right, I will put you down. Oh, I would walk 500 miles and I would... This is not a music podcast either, so I will not make my listeners' ears excruciate with me trying my attempts to sing it. But I've got you down there, Robert. That's fantastic. The reason is I'm putting a playlist together. Each of my guests gets to choose a song. It goes on that playlist. It's quite an eclectic mix. And yeah, we could see how many people tune into it on their own bike trips as well.
How do I get that playlist?
Oh, I will send you a link.
Oh, perfect.
I've put it together on Spotify and also on Apple Music there as well, so people can click that and listen to the playlist there as too. And I will link it in the show notes as well. Okay, last two questions. You're facing a day and it's going to test you because you can either choose to ride up a constant climb or alternatively, you could choose to ride into a constant headwind. Which one would you choose?
I would choose the climb.
Yeah. I sort of thought with the way that you were recounting your recent wind experiences, when I heard that, I sort of knew already with this question in mind what your answer was going to be.
The headwind just, it seems to suck so much energy out of you, dehydrate you and everything. And climbing a mountain seems to be an accomplishment. Fighting a headwind doesn't seem to be much of an accomplishment in my mind. But to get to the top of the climb and you say, I did it, I made it, that might be one feeling I don't get as much on an e-bike as I did on my road bike, is the sense of accomplishment after a long climb.
It's just going to take a mind shift for you though, isn't it? Because you're still doing it.
Well, still doing it, yeah.
It's no different to upgrading from that 3-speed or changing the cluster on the back cassette.
True. Yeah, no, yeah.
Okay, last question. You're given a choice one day. You're only going to be riding for 4 hours on this day, but you could choose whether you want to ride 4 hours on your own or 4 hours in the company of other people. Which one would you choose?
Oh, you ask such difficult questions. I'm used to riding solo. All the time when I ride at home, I'm riding solo. When friends come to visit me, I certainly enjoy their company. Sometimes when I'm riding with people on this trip, it means I have to wait for them. We take longer for coffee breaks and lunch breaks and things. But I'm going to say I would choose riding with a person rather than solo.
I actually had an inkling that that's what you were going to pick. I don't know why even, but I just had this inkling. And maybe it's because it's only 4 hours on one day. I'm not sure. I certainly hope, Robert, that we will spend a few hours together riding up the Tourmalet and down it as well, by the way. There's a lovely descent.
I look forward to it. I'm thinking of shipping to Amsterdam, but I'm just not sure which way to go and the weather and everything. So maybe ship the car to Rotterdam and start from there, head in your direction.
Fantastic. I'm sure we can get a whole crew together for that ride as well. That would be brilliant. I actually do have one more question, and I feel it's a simple one, but maybe it's not. And it's when you reflect back on this whole journey of yours, and if you want, you can even put it back to your whole life. But when you reflect back, what's the thing that leaves you with the biggest sense of pride? You talked about, the sense of pride of reaching a climb, but more broadly than that, what fills you with joy and pride for what you've achieved on this trip?
Okay. I was thinking that riding here yesterday, guanaco, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right. It's a llama-like creature that lives here on Patagonia. I was racing with him. He saw me and he was a little frightened and he took off, and there was a fence that was guiding him down the road in the ditch, and I rode along. And after a while, he stopped, looked back. I was still there. He took off again. And then I could see he's getting out of breath after 1 or 2 kilometers, and he would stop every 100 meters and look at me, and then I would stop and look at him. And that started me thinking about what a wonderful life I'm living, riding with this wonderful animal down the road in Argentina. And then I started reflecting back on the vistas I've seen and the people I've met and what it was all about, and feeling that not so much accomplishment, but the joy of visiting all these places just kind of filled me at that time as I was riding with this animal down the road. The other aspect for me is you set a goal and you accomplish it, and the goal setting and achievement is also a good part of what I experience. And I hope that continues as well.
I'm sure it will. Robert, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you here today, to hear you recount your story and share your experiences with our listeners. I'm wishing you tailwinds for the rest of your journey. So when you check the weather tomorrow, I really hope that it's a stonking tailwind and that tailwinds greet you all the way to Ushuaia. Thank you so much for sharing your stories and experiences with our listeners here on Seek Travel Ride.
Well, again, thank you, Bella, and thank you for doing this podcast that recognize all these wonderful people that are doing these rides and adventures around the world. Thank you very much. I enjoyed everything today, and I look forward to seeing you next summer.
Yeah, on the Tourmalet, here we come. Thank you, Robert.
All right. Ciao.
I'm just taking away so much inspiration from Robert there and his story, from hearing him speak about this life of adventure and just hearing how age is no barrier for him. He keeps taking on these challenges. I really love the fact that he's just planning out the decade of adventures. Something that started out to celebrate a birthday has turned out to celebrate a decade. And I'm looking forward to not only riding with Robert on the Tourmalet, but also just seeing what adventures lie ahead for him as he celebrates being in the 80s. Now, if you are listening to the show and enjoying what you're hearing, make sure that you follow the show in your podcast playing app. That way you'll be notified when new episodes are released. I release new episodes weekly, and if you follow us in your app, you'll be notified so you never miss a single one of our guest stories. If you'd like to get in touch and join the Seek Travel Ride community, you can do a search for us. We have a Facebook group, Seek Travel Ride. Search for us in Facebook or click the link in the listener notes and it'll take you right there. Until the next episode, I'm Bella Malloy. Thanks for listening.